I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about that morning. You know, the kind of morning that starts normal. Sun shining, birds chirping, coffee brewing, and then in a blink, everything goes off the rails. I never thought I'd be the person telling a story that sounds completely made up. Your Jeep? Yeah, it's in the HOA president's pool. But that's exactly what happened. And yes, I'm serious. It all started the night before, when I let my guard down. Big mistake. I had just washed my Jeep, polished it until it gleamed like it belonged in a magazine, and parked it right in my driveway. I live in a neighborhood with rules, but I always thought of mine as common sense rules. Like, don't steal, don't vandalize, don't make a scene. Simple, right? Apparently, I was overestimating humanity. Enter Karen. You know the type. Perfectly coiffed, HOA badge pinned like a Medal of Honor, with a kid who acts like he's the next big Hollywood stunt driver. I'd exchanged polite nods with her before. Nothing. That would make me think her son would treat my Jeep like a personal amusement park ride. But that morning, I learned the hard way that parenting sometimes doesn't involve consequences. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, expecting a peaceful Sunday. And then I saw it. My Jeep was gone. Completely gone. At first, I thought I'd dreamt it. Maybe it was hidden behind the hedges. Nope, not there. Panic started to claw at me. But I didn't even have time to process because then I heard it. A splash. Curiosity, mixed with fear, propelled me toward the sound. My neighbors were already outside, phones out, faces twisted into expressions of disbelief. And there it was. My beautiful Jeep, my pride and joy, sitting halfway submerged in the HOA president's sparkling backyard pool. The water rippled like it was mocking me, and Karen's son stood nearby, arms crossed, grinning like he had just pulled off the heist of the century. What happened? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, as if saying it louder might somehow reverse the situation. Karen appeared behind him, horror plastered across her perfectly made-up face, and yet there was a weird glint in her eye, like she was more worried about the pool tiles than my Jeep. In that moment, I realized I was about to become the main character in the kind of story that normally ends up on viral videos. And trust me, what happened next? It was something I would never forget. Before I dive into how Karen's son actually managed to roll my Jeep into the pool, I need to warn you, this story only gets crazier from here. The second I processed what had just happened, reality hit me like a freight train. My Jeep, my perfectly detailed, recently polished Jeep, was floating in someone else's pool, and there was nothing I could do but stare. Karen's son was smirking like he'd won some twisted lottery, while Karen herself fumbled with her words. I had never seen someone struggle so hard to look outraged and casual at the same time. It was surreal. Excuse me, I began cautiously, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you mind explaining how my Jeep ended up in your pool? Karen opened her mouth, closed it, and then tried again. I don't know how this happened, she stammered. He must have. Her words trailed off as her son shrugged, clearly proud of his work. At that moment, I realized logic and reason were about to take a back seat. I ran over to the Jeep, trying not to slip on the wet grass. The water had already started seeping into the interior, and I could see the leather seats slowly soaking up the pool water. My heart sank. I knew I'd be paying thousands in repairs, and at the same time, I couldn't help but feel this wasn't just about the Jeep. It was about the audacity of it all. Son, I said, turning to the culprit directly, trying to channel every ounce of authority I had, what were you thinking? He grinned wider. I just wanted to see if it could float. I froze. I stared at him. Then I stared at Karen. And that's when I realized something terrifying. She wasn't going to back me up. She was trying to hold back laughter. I wasn't just dealing with a reckless teen, I was dealing with a mom who thought this was hilarious. At that point, my neighbors had gathered, phones pointed at the scene, already filming. Great. Perfect. My Jeep's nightmare had just become viral content for the neighborhood. I tried reasoning with Karen, but she kept throwing out excuses, half-hearted apologies, and it's just water reassurances. Clearly, the concept of financial responsibility didn't exist in her vocabulary. Then came the absurd part. Karen's son suggested we push it back in, as if the Jeep was a giant toy. My patience, already stretched thin, snapped. I could feel my blood pressure spike as I imagined trying to salvage my Jeep from her backyard swimming pool while she and her kid watched like it was some kind of performance art. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Karen did something that made me question the very fabric of reality. She smiled at me and said, "Well, maybe this is a lesson about sharing." Sharing? My Jeep? In a pool? I blinked, trying to process. I couldn't even. That's when I realized I was in for a fight I didn't know I signed up for. One that involved not just my Jeep, but the entire HOA, her ridiculous sense of entitlement, and an audience of nosy neighbors ready to document every second. And that's when it hit me. I had to act fast, or my Jeep and my sanity would be gone for good. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but it was useless. My Jeep was halfway submerged, the sun glinting off the water as if mocking me, and Karen's son was grinning like a kid who'd just won the jackpot. I realized that if I didn't act fast, this scene would escalate into total chaos, and probably a viral neighborhood scandal. First, I had to assess the damage. The Jeep's tires were floating slightly, the door seals soaking up pool water, and the leather interior looked like it had been dropped in a rainstorm. I considered just leaving it and calling insurance, but no, I couldn't. This was my Jeep, my pride and joy, and if I didn't, try to save it myself, I'd never forgive myself. "All right," I said, addressing Karen and her son. "We need to get this out now before it's ruined beyond repair." My voice was calm, but inside I was a tornado of rage and disbelief. Karen blinked. Okay, but I don't really know how." "Then help me figure it out," I snapped, ignoring her hesitation. At this point, I didn't care about etiquette or HOA drama. I needed action. I grabbed a nearby garden hose and attempted to anchor the Jeep while Karen's son tried to help by pushing it with a pool noodle. The absurdity of the situation was staggering. A grown adult, a Jeep, and a pool noodle. It felt like a bad sitcom. Neighbors had gathered, whispering, pointing, and filming every second. I could feel their judgmental stares as we struggled. Water sloshing everywhere, trying to float, guide, and eventually pull my Jeep to safety. Karen hovered at the side, alternating between panic and fascination, clearly torn between supervising and capturing the drama on her phone. After what felt like hours, but was probably just 20 minutes, I finally managed to inch the Jeep close enough to the pool's edge to start dragging it out. The leather was soaked, the tires coated in slippery algae, and every inch of water I displaced seemed to multiply the chaos. Karen's son kept laughing, as if this was a victory lap, while I was losing what little patience I had left. By some miracle, or perhaps sheer stubbornness, I finally got the Jeep out. It was soaked, it was dirty, and it smelled faintly of chlorine and regret, but it was out. I collapsed against it, dripping wet, exhausted, and staring at the crowd of neighbors who had watched the entire spectacle unfold. Their silence was louder than any applause could have been. Karen finally said something, her voice small this time. I guess, sorry?" I looked at her, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say. But honestly, at that moment, words didn't seem sufficient. The Jeep was safe, for now, but the nightmare was far from over. I knew I'd have to deal with insurance, HOA complaints, and the lingering realization that some people's sense of entitlement knew no bounds. And that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The HOA president, who had been watching silently, was approaching. Just when I thought the nightmare had reached its peak, the HOA president emerged from behind his hedge, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, and mouth set in that expression that screams, "I am judging everything you do." My Jeep was out of the pool, but now I had to face him, the man whose backyard had just become an accidental automotive water feature. "Do you realize what just happened here?" he demanded, voice sharp and pointing at my soaked Jeep like I was the culprit. I blinked. Me? I hadn't rolled my Jeep into his pool. I hadn't even thought about doing that. But explaining that wouldn't be easy, especially with Karen's son smirking behind me like he'd just invented chaos itself. "Sir, it wasn't me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It was Karen's son. He, rolled it into your pool." The HOA president's eyes flicked to Karen, then to her son. The kid didn't even flinch. Karen tried to interject, but he shushed her with a smug grin, as if he'd rehearsed this moment his entire life. The president's gaze shifted between the kid and me, and I swear I could see the gears turning in his head. "You're kidding me," he muttered. Then louder, "Karen, your son, he did this?" Karen's face turned a shade of red that could rival a fire truck. "It was an accident," she said, her voice wavering. "I swear I didn't." "An accident?" the HOA president barked. "Do you understand the liability here? The pool tiles, the cleaning, the potential damage?" He turned to me. "And your Jeep, are you pressing charges?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted revenge. Part of me wanted to scream at Karen for her negligence. But part of me was still shaking from the adrenaline, from seeing my Jeep float like some bizarre rubber duck, and from witnessing the utter chaos of that morning. "No," I said finally, surprising even myself. "I just want it fixed. I want insurance to cover it, and I want this to be a lesson for everyone involved." Karen's son snorted, obviously unimpressed. The HOA president sighed, rubbing his temples, and muttered something about parents today under his breath. I could feel the tension slowly deflating, like steam escaping a pressure cooker. After a few awkward exchanges about repairs, liability forms, and cleaning fees, I finally managed to pull myself and my Jeep away from the poolside battlefield. My neighbors had gone back inside, likely replaying the scene on their phones for hours. I looked at Karen and her son one last time. The Jeep was safe, the pool was slightly worse for wear, and I had survived the chaos. But one thing was clear. No matter how peaceful a neighborhood seems, some mornings are just made for disaster. That day, I learned something valuable. Never underestimate an entitled kid, a permissive parent, or the sheer unpredictability of HOA drama. And yes, always lock your Jeep. If you laughed, gasped, or screamed, "What the?" even once, then you owe me a like. Subscribe before the HOA bans me. And comment "Justice for the Jeep" below.